Okay, let's dive right in. I want you to picture two radically different lives. On one hand, you've got the most powerful emperor on the planet, a guy commanding the absolute vastness of the Roman Empire. On the other hand, a crippled slave emerging from the absolute lowest, grittiest class of ancient society. Their daily realities were separated by an unimaginable chasm of wealth, power, and privilege. So, what could these two possibly have in common? It's a wild juxtaposition, right? Trying to figure out how a destitute man who technically owned absolutely nothing and a man carrying the literal weight of the known world could find common ground. Well, it turns out they shared the exact same operating system for their minds.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're looking at The Great Equalizer, Stoicism's Guide to Inner Peace. We're going to uncover how ancient Stoicism served as the ultimate equalizer for three very different Romans. We'll explore how an insanely wealthy statesman, a formerly enslaved teacher, and a burdened emperor used the exact same philosophy to conquer their incredibly different circumstances, and how it can be a totally vital toolkit for your life today. To really get what drove these guys, we first need to look at their shared ultimate goal, which was eudaimonia. It's a Greek word that basically translates to an ultimate state of human flourishing. We're talking about a profound, unshakable sense of inner peace and tranquility. And the Stoics made a pretty radical claim about this. They said this ultimate happiness relies entirely on how we think, not on what actually happens to us. So how do you actually get there? The crucial point is that they believed this inner peace could only be unlocked through one specific path, which they called virtue. They defined virtue as living in accordance with nature. Practically speaking, that breaks down into four cardinal goods: wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation. These are internal qualities. We have total control over them, completely regardless of our external circumstances, whether we're sitting in a palace or locked in chains. And this brilliantly illustrates the whole point of their philosophy. The philosopher's school isn't some out-of-touch ivory tower. It's a hospital for souls. Philosophy wasn't meant to be just dry academic theory to be debated by scholars. No, it was designed as a literal medical treatment. It was a therapy for the mind to cure your everyday anxiety, frustration, fear, and discontent. All right, let's start with our first historical patient and practitioner, Seneca. This guy was a tremendously wealthy playwright and a top political advisor to the Emperor Nero. So Seneca was a man who constantly had to navigate the treacherous, turbulent, and frankly dangerous waters of immense power and riches at the very heart of the Roman elite. His life was absolute chaos, yet he relied on Stoicism to keep his bearings. Even with all his extreme wealth, Seneca figured out pretty quickly that time, not money, was his most valuable asset. He famously wrote, "The greatest obstacle to living is expectation, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today." He's warning us against that deeply human tendency to waste our lives constantly procrastinating, putting off our happiness and just abandoning the present moment for some uncertain future. So he leaves us with some highly practical advice to take charge of the steering wheel right now. First up, live immediately. Stop postponing your life. Second, contemplate a role model. The Stoics would constantly ask themselves, what would the ideal sage do, to measure their daily actions? And third, prepare for adversity. He actually advised setting aside a few days to practice living on the scantiest fare, just to realize that poverty really isn't as terrifying as we build it up to be in our heads. Okay, let's switch gears and see how this builds. Meet Epictetus. His background is a stark, almost jarring contrast to Seneca's. We don't even know his real name. Epictetus just meant acquired in Greek. He was born a slave, he was crippled in one leg, and yet, in this brilliant stroke of irony, he used Stoicism to find a path to ultimate freedom, eventually setting up his own highly influential school. At his school in Greece, Epictetus taught what are basically described as the three portals to happiness: right judgment, virtue, and low expectations. The most foundational one here is judgment. Epictetus taught that it isn't external events that harm us. It's not the physical pain or losing your money. It's our judgment and our opinion of those events. If you believe you've been harmed, well, only then are you truly harmed. To really show why this matters today, just imagine his incredibly practical advice for visiting the local Roman bathhouse. We're talking chaos. Splashing water, naked thieves, loud abusive language. Epictetus argued that if you mentally prepare for this absolute mess beforehand, you protect your inner peace. When the splashing and shouting inevitably happen, you aren't bothered, because your primary goal wasn't just to take a bath, but to keep your mind in a state conformable to nature.
And that finally brings us to Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king. He was the emperor of Rome who, despite carrying the completely crushing burden of leading an empire and fighting exhausting wars on the northern frontiers, sought virtue above everything else. His famous book, Meditations, actually wasn't even written for us to read. It was a private diary of a late middle-aged guy just striving to process the immense stress of his daily life.
To handle all that massive responsibility without cracking, Marcus heavily valued a concept known as the reserve clause. It's super simple. You just say, I intend to do this, fate permitting, or as long as nothing prevents me. By undertaking every single action with the calm acceptance that things might just not turn out as planned, Marcus effectively shielded himself from crushing disappointment when the unpredictable world inevitably got in his way. Picture him writing alone in his tent on a military campaign in Germania. Marcus used this profound cosmic perspective to ground himself. He wrote, "The infinity of past and future gapes before us, a chasm whose depths we cannot see. So it would take an idiot to feel self-importance or distress." He was actively reminding himself that human life, and hey, even the Roman Empire itself, is just a tiny hiccup in the vast, endless flow of cosmic time. So what should you really take away from all this? It's that happiness is entirely 100% relative to your mindset. Think about it. Millionaires and prisoners alike both experience good days and bad days. Genuine happiness doesn't magically come from sudden fortune, and misery doesn't just stem from misfortune. Everything is temporary. The degree of joy we experience is strictly dependent on our inner faculties and exactly how we choose to process our reality. Which brings us right back full circle to the great Stoic realization. External wealth, money, status, power, it is totally value neutral. It's completely out of our control. It can be used by a bad person for evil or a good person for good. But our internal character, that is the true source of joy, and it rests entirely in our own hands. So, knowing that the poorest, crippled slave and the richest, most powerful emperor used the exact same philosophical tools to conquer their own minds, I want to leave you with Marcus Aurelius's ultimate challenge for your own life. He said, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. The tools are right there in your hands. How are you going to use them today?"